Now, there is, so then you get to Siders Jr., the guy with the indecent exposure allegations, and his wife, who gave birth, as far as we know, to all 16 of these kids, was a child bride. The obvious way that you get into the story, as you did with Turpin, is through the kids. What if you don't have the kids? What if they can't help you with the prosecution? How do you now not just explain it all away as poverty? You've got no documentation. You've got no agency interaction. You've got no schooling for that perspective. The kids haven't said anything. They can't say anything. How do you get the truth of what happened? Because you say, I locked them in a 12 by 12 room. They're covered in shit and this and that, and they haven't eaten. And I say, yeah, I'm all right. I'm a bad parent, but I wasn't trying to be a bad parent. I'm broke.
We begin not with a photograph but with a single line item from a county auditor's property record, a detail buried in a mundane tick of square footage. For 3718 Clifton Road, the official file reads 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom. That is the public record. That is the box the state of Ohio checked. Now hold that number in your mind. 3 bedrooms. The narrative that follows is an indictment of every system that claims to see 16 children. 4 adults. They were all living inside a geometry that defies physics. A space where the walls didn't just contain bodies, they erased voices. To understand the horror, you don't start with the crime. You start with the blueprint. And the blueprint was a lie. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to EvidenceAxis, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Imagine, for a moment, a house that functions not as a shelter, but as a mute button. That is the visual anchor of this case. It's not the filth or the starvation, though those are the physical facts. It's the profound engineered silence. The state alleges these children were so linguistically crippled by isolation that they couldn't form a sentence. Some, despite being teenagers, were entirely nonverbal. We are not merely looking at a house of horrors. We are looking at a soundproof chamber of state failure. The legal crisis here isn't just what happened inside those 3 bedrooms. The crisis is what happens inside a courtroom when the only witnesses to a crime have been robbed of the very code required to describe it. The prosecution's case doesn't hinge on a smoking gun. It hinges on a missing dictionary. This brings us to the central fracture in the justice system's logic. We are conditioned to believe that a victim's testimony gold standard, the clear, articulate recounting of trauma. But here, the prosecution faces a wall of silence so complete it's almost an accomplice. The vocabulary of this case is immediately split to 2 tracks. On the legal track, you hear forensic interview competency, augmentative communication assessment, and non-verbal intellectual blockage. Here is the plain English translation: the children cannot take the stand because they have no words. They do not know how to explain what hunger felt like over a decade. They cannot articulate what confinement means because they've never known its opposite. The defense will inevitably pivot on this vacuum. They will argue that a lack of coherent testimony means a lack of evidence. They will hold up the silence as a shield, claiming the to intent beyond a reasonable doubt if the accuser cannot speak. But that's the trap, because the silence isn't the absence of evidence, it is the evidence. The profound developmental catastrophe revealed in the hostage plea, the inability to speak, the lack of basic motor skills, the feral response to light and touch is the crime. They didn't just fail to teach them language, they erased their capacity to scream.
And it's hard, and I got a lot of kids, and I'm a little brainwashed, and I'm a little stupid, I'm a little simple. And I wasn't trying to hurt my kids. This is the best I could do.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a good defense. I agree with your one statement that it's going to be nearly impossible for the kids to relay the details of what they survived through, like the Turpins did. That's going to be very difficult, and it's going to take some of the best professionals to elicit that information. Not just law enforcement professionals, but medical and child life specialists and all those people. And it could turn out, I do believe they will end up getting statements. They might not all be verbal statements.
Here we arrive at the ticking clock moment. This isn't just a child abuse case, it's a breach of the most fundamental infrastructure. If a group of individuals can systematically detonate the cognitive development of 16 American minors without a single agency triangulating their location, what exactly is our national security apparatus protecting? We track financial transactions, we register vehicles, we mandate school attendance, yet, on a plot of land visible to a Dollar General parking lot, a void formed where childhood should have been. The document of failure here isn't a witness statement, it's the absence of any educational records, any vaccination schedules, any pediatric ups for nearly 2 decades. That is a massive data hole in the civic grid.
And the parents weren't found criminally responsible.
No. I mean, we're talking kids so malnutrition, they were on the verge of death and had to be airlifted to the hospital. That's severe child neglect. That's felony child neglect.
And the idea of why, I know that motive isn't part of a prosecution, but it is a big part of doing an investigation. Means, motive, and opportunity in terms of trying to assess a crime are fundamentals for you guys. When you look at the House of Horrors, as it's being called, and the attorney for Elizabeth Siders will certainly say that that is a mischaracterization. How important is motive, and what does it look like from what you've seen so far?
At this point, I believe there's several reasons why it happened. And maybe some of them are monetary related, economical related, lack of money. But Chris, you know as well as I do, there's free health care out there. I mean, I'd like to know if any of them ever went to the doctors for anything. You know, there's opportunities for childcare money out there and feeding these kids out there. Our society isn't broken down so much that we're going to let 2 kids starve.
If a ticking bomb goes off in a crowded square, we hunt the bomber. If a slow burn biological weapon dismantles 16 human minds at a house that held 3 bedrooms but no mercy, shouldn't the systemic alarm have been louder?
But to the other siblings who had to listen to that every night.
Are you, given what you learned from Turpin and your experience within the system, were you surprised to hear that whether it was Vinton County, you know, we don't know yet why they showed up at the house. It may have been about the indecent exposure cases. It may have been about something else. We don't know yet. We haven't really gotten a clear picture of that from the authorities yet. But does it shock you that these people were able to move around in Ohio for this long without being detected by neighbors or any kind of government agency?
Well, their house was, it sounds like it was very rurally isolated. No direct neighbors, unlike the Turpins, who had neighbors on all 3 or 4 sides of them, 5 if you want to count all the houses around them. And it sounded like the train tracks maybe separated them from the Dollar General, but the Dollar General people knew about the kids. They took up donations and stuff for the kids. I'm really surprised that no one ever reached out to any child protective service agency or some kind of assistance.
And now to the moral refrain that anchors this entire prosecution. We cannot grade suffering on a curve, and we cannot grade it on a sliding scale of poverty. The narrative emerging from the defense is a tragedy cloaked in the language of economic collapse and diminished capacitabilis dissect the economics of abuse. Cleanliness doesn't require a trust fund. Soap and water have no monthly subscription fee.
You know, there was pregnancy and birth after pregnancy and birth. I think that may say something about her mental health, knowing that probably after the first 2, there was no means to provide for these children. But that doesn't mean that she didn't love them in her own way. Not the way you or I would love our kids and care for our kids. She may have loved them, but she could have taken care of them better. It doesn't cost anything for cleanliness.
Can you love someone? Can you be sane, mentally competent, and have kids in the condition that these kids reportedly were?
No. And to me, that would be a near impossibility. She might have had the love and she might have had the want, but she didn't have the means and she didn't apply anything.
The physical conditions reported, the feces smeared walls, the urine soaked floors, are not indicators of a checkbook that bounced. They are indicators of a soul that broke. And that's the distinction the jury must swallow. The defense will present a picture of a family overwhelmed, a mother who claims she loves her children and wants them back, a father in a spiral of poverty and religious rigidity. They will paint a portrait of doing their best. But to accept that is to accept a logical impossibility that you can love a Chinesely extinguish their ability to ask for help. You cannot love what you are actively rendering invisible. Soap and water have no monthly subscription fee. That is the reality check. The filth was a choice, layered on top of the isolation. Pivot to the parallel narrative, the dark mirror of the Turpin case in California. Everyone in law enforcement is making the comparison, not just because of the number of children, but because of the architecture of deception. In the Turpin case, the children were able to articulate a detailed schedule of abuse. They could testify to the chains, the beatings, the frequency of meals. The prosecution there had a script. In Ohio, a script has been burned. The parallels are haunting, but the evidentiary chasm is vast. We have a mother, arrested and charged, yet reportedly asking constantly about the welfare of her children, expressing a desire for reunification. We saw this identical pattern with Louise Turpin.
Not a feces-laced, urine-soaked room.
And when you remember the Turpin, how was the mother's disposition towards the kids once they were separated from her in that case?
She loved them and wanted to be reunited with them. And at the early onset in 2018, they loved their parents. They were the only parents they had ever known. Everyone from the 29.
It's a performance of maternal instinct that contradicts the physical reality of the children's bodies. Here the exhibit isn't a diary of survival found under a mattress. It's a medical chart detailing a bone density scan that resembles a victim of a famine, not a resident of a first world. Globe is almost unbearable. The adults in the house could speak to police, could lawyer up instantly, could articulate their defense. The victims, the actual sources of truth, can only draw pictures if their fine motor skills even allow it. So, how do you prosecute when the evidence bucket is filled only with forensics and the silent architecture of the body? The answer lies in a pute away from vocal testimony toward the doctrine of res ipsa loquitur. The thing speaks for itself. You don't need a child to tell you they were starved when the metabolic panel shows a state of wasting. You don't need a verbal recount of neglect when the pressure soars on the skin map out exactly where a body lay, unmoving, on a bare floor. The forensic interviewer's toolkit shifts from a microphone to a sketchpad, from a direct question to a play therapy assessment. The crime scene becomes the only voice. Soap and water have no monthly subscription fee. That's the second time I say it. We repeat it because the urge to soften the defendants, to view the grandparents as confused, the mother as a victim of the father as a product of his environment, is a cultural reflex. It's a seductive sympathy, but it's shattered the moment you remember the utility bill was paid, the logistics were managed, the concealment was deliberate. You don't accidentally hide 16 humans from the IRS. You don't accidentally forget to teach a human being the word for pain. Finally, we reach the hard evidence of the leaf fork in the road. The DNA is the easy part.
That Gary Siders Jr., the one with the indecent exposure stuff, the one who's supposedly the biological father of these kids. Now, you're going to know all that, too. That's just DNA. They're going to find out who's the daddy and who's the mommy. So they'll know if there's any overlap with the grandparents and the parents here. So you'll get that piece. But after that, what kinds of interviews, assuming that they're...
A simple swab will establish the biological lines between the adults, mapping out whether the reproductive horror crowds incest to the indictment. That's a laboratory result, clean and uncontaminated by human emotion. The complex part is the competency of the perpetrators. The attorneys for the grandparents are already seeding the ground with suggestions of dementia and diminished capacity.
Love their parents, and they wish their parents hadn't treated them like they had.
What is the chance that not all of these four people, the adults, who have been, fingered as suspects in abuse and worse of these kids, what's the chance that they don't all get the same treatment legally?
I think there's a high likelihood that the biological parents are going to be held more to a higher standard and accountability than the grandparents, despite the fact, in my mind, the grandparents had more life experience.
They were taken advantage of too. The public neurologist's assessment of a 73-year-old cannot erase 18 years of silence. If the grandparents were legally incompetent, they were incompetent for 70 days. Why didn't the legally competent parents, the ones functioning well enough to give police a limited statement through their attorney, seek guardianship for the elderly? Because the entire system was designed to run on isolation. It was a self-sealing ecosystem of neglect.
What do you need to figure out, and where will you get the answers?
I don't think you need to try to figure out much. So if they were taken advantage of for 18 years and they never reached out for any type of social services or any type of intervention by law enforcement, were being taken advantage of, or relayed their information to any therapist, psychologist, hospital, anything. Anyone would have helped them if they thought they were being taken advantage of. They were definitely complacent in all this, 100%, but they weren't taken advantage of. They opted to live there. They opted to move. I don't know the number of times, the number of times they moved. And so they had options.
This case isn't a mystery. It's a math equation where the state just has to carry the one. Physical malnutritional isolation, multiplied by the square footage of the house, equals aggravated criminal intent.
Experience. You should have known better.
Assuming that they're not mentally deficient, either by disease or diminished capacity. Have you ever seen a case where kids were in the kind of condition that's reported here and the parents weren't found criminally responsible?
No. I mean, we're talking kids so malnutrition, they were on the verge of death and had to be airlifted to the hospital.
When we look at the mugshots, we search for the monster. But the forensic reality is more disturbing. The monster isn't teen, it's the time span, 18 years. 18 years of missed birthdays that weren't recorded, missed immunizations that weren't cataloged, missed sentences that were never spoken. We arrive back at the unanswered question. If these walls could finally speak, they'd tell a story of a system that relies entirely on a victim dialing 911. But what if the victim never knew a phone existed? This is where we end and where you begin. We are directing you to a specific publicly available filing. The initial complaint and affidavit filed in the municipal court of the jurisdiction. You can find it in the public access terminal. We want you to read the description of the rescue the moment the authorities crossed the threshold. In the comments, answer this direct question based solely on the physical condition described in that report. Do you believe the silence of the children is a barrier to justice, or is it the most deafening testimony the court has ever heard? If you followed the evidence this far, you know the case doesn't close with an arrest. It opens with a document. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to EvidenceAxis and turn on notifications, because the truth is always in the record.